They told her it was a nice rifle for a girl. Patronizing smiles, condescending nods, as if precision marksmanship required testosterone instead of training. Honey Baker smiled back and said nothing, because she'd learned long ago that words meant nothing when a single trigger pull could speak louder than 1,000 arguments. What those elite SEALs didn't know was that the quiet European woman cleaning her rifle in the corner would soon shatter every shooting record on their board. And in doing so, force the most elite warriors in the world to question everything they thought they knew about what made a perfect shot. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The California sun painted the shooting range in harsh afternoon light as Honey Baker adjusted her scope for the third time that morning. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado buzzed with the controlled chaos of elite military training, where the best of the best came to prove they belonged among legends. For most people, being assigned here would represent the pinnacle of a military career. For Honey, it felt like being trapped in a glass case labeled "Handle with Care." At 23 years old, she'd already served 5 years in the British Armed Forces, transferring to a joint NATO program that placed exceptional soldiers in cross-training opportunities with Allied Special Operations units. Her marksmanship scores had been exemplary, top of her class in every metric that mattered. Her tactical knowledge was encyclopedic, her physical conditioning beyond reproach. On paper, she was exactly the kind of soldier who deserved to train alongside the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. In reality, she was a curiosity, a novelty, a girl with a nice rifle. The range officer, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, approached her station with the same expression he wore every morning during qualification drills. Professional courtesy masking barely concealed skepticism. He glanced at her target, where 15 rounds had created a single ragged hole at center mass from 300 meters. Then consulted his clipboard as if the evidence before his eyes required administrative verification. "Solid grouping. Baker," he said, his tone suggesting he was commenting on adequate coffee rather than exceptional marksmanship. "You'll be running logistics support for today's advanced tactical exercise." Honey felt the familiar tightness in her chest, that combination of frustration and resignation that had become her constant companion since arriving at Coronado 6 weeks ago. "Sir, I was hoping to participate in the field exercise. My scores qualify me for—" "Your scores are fine," Hayes interrupted, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone who'd already made up his mind. "But the advanced exercises involve close-quarters combat scenarios, building clearances, hostile extraction simulations. These operators need to trust that their team members can handle themselves in extreme physical confrontations. No offense, Baker, but you're what? 120 soaking wet. 118 pounds, actually, and 5'5" in her boots." Honey had heard variations of this conversation so many times she could recite both parts from memory. She was too small, too light, too likely to become a liability when situations turned physical. It didn't matter that she'd scored higher than half the SEALs in hand-to-hand combat evaluations, or that her endurance runs consistently placed her in the top quartile. When men looked at her, they saw limitations dressed in fatigues. "Understood, sir," she said, because arguing was pointless. Hayes wasn't malicious, just convinced he was making the reasonable decision. Keeping the fragile little European girl safe from situations she couldn't handle, as Hayes walked away. Honey heard the conversation that had become the soundtrack to her time at Coronado. 3 SEALs were setting up at adjacent shooting stations, their voices carrying in the dry air with the casual confidence of men who'd never doubted their place in the world. "Did you see her grouping?" The speaker was Turner, a veteran operator whose weathered face suggested decades of classified operations. "Kid can shoot, I'll give her that." "Sure," replied his companion, a younger SEAL named Patterson whose muscular frame looked like it had been designed by a comic book artist. "But shooting static targets on a sunny day isn't the same as making shots when everything's gone sideways. When was the last time a real op went down in perfect conditions with unlimited time to adjust your scope?" "Plus," added the third man, a towering figure everyone called Dutch, "precision shooting in combat isn't just about marksmanship. It's about hauling 60 pounds of gear up a mountain, holding position for 12 hours in 100-degree heat, then making the shot while your heart's trying to punch through your chest." No disrespect to Baker, But there's a reason why the majority of elite snipers are built like linebackers. Honey continued cleaning her rifle, her hands steady despite the anger building in her gut. They weren't wrong, exactly. Combat shooting did require physical endurance, the ability to perform under physiological stress that turned most people's fine motor skills to mush. What they couldn't see, what nobody here seemed capable of recognizing, was that she'd already proven she could do exactly that. Just not in front of them, not in circumstances they considered legitimate. The truth was that Honey Baker had been making impossible shots under impossible conditions since she was 16 years old, learning marksmanship from her grandfather in the Scottish Highlands. But those accomplishments had occurred in contexts these men didn't respect, taught by instructors they'd never heard of, in programs they considered inferior to their own elite training. So she smiled, nodded, and prepared for another day of proving herself to people who'd already decided she didn't measure up. The pattern had established itself within her first week at Coronado, and 6 weeks later, it had calcified into something that felt permanent. Honey excelled at every quantifiable metric, then watched as less qualified operators were selected for advanced training opportunities while she was assigned to support roles. The morning's logistics assignment proved of her experience. While the SEAL team conducted building clearance exercises, Honey sat in the equipment staging area, inventorying ammunition and verifying radio equipment. Through the observation windows, she could watch the operators moving through the mock urban environment, their movements fluid and professional. She'd studied their techniques obsessively, could identify inefficiencies in their approaches, places where better positioning would create cleaner sight lines. Nobody asked for her observations. Nobody seemed to consider that the woman counting magazines might have tactical insights worth hearing. During the lunch break, Honey found herself sitting alone at a corner table in the mess hall, picking at a salad while reviewing range data on her tablet. She'd started tracking every shooting session, every qualification drill, comparing her performance metrics against the posted records for the base's top performers. The numbers told a story that everyone seemed determined to ignore. Her average grouping at 300 meters, 1.2 inches. Base record, 1.4 inches. Her time to first accurate shot from standby, 2.1 seconds. Base record, 2.3 seconds. Her cold bore accuracy percentage, 98.4. Base record, 96.1. In every measurable category of marksmanship, she matched or exceeded the best performances recorded at Coronado. Yet here she sat, alone, while the men whose records she'd beaten discussed tactics and planned operations without her. "Mind if I join you?" Honey looked up to find Chief Petty Officer Reynolds standing beside her table, his tray loaded with enough food to feed a small family. Reynolds was one of the senior instructors, a 30-year veteran whose opinion carried considerable weight among the SEAL community. Unlike many of his colleagues, he'd never been overtly dismissive toward her, but he'd also never advocated for her inclusion in advanced training. "Of course, Chief," she replied. Closing her tablet, Reynolds settled into his seat with a grunt that suggested his knees had endured more punishment than they were designed for. For a moment, he ate in silence, and Honey wondered if this was going to be another awkward attempt at mentorship, the kind where senior personnel tried to gently explain why she should adjust her expectations. "You're frustrated," Reynolds said finally, not bothering to frame it as a question. Honey considered denying it, then decided honesty might be more productive than politeness. "Yes, Chief, I am. Because you're not getting selected for field exercises. Because I'm not getting selected despite outperforming half the people who are," Honey corrected, keeping her voice level. "I understand that shooting isn't everything. I know there are other factors that matter in team selection, but I haven't been given the opportunity to demonstrate those other capabilities." Reynolds nodded slowly, chewing thoughtfully on a bite of his sandwich. "You're right," he said, and Honey felt a spark of hope that maybe, finally, someone was going to acknowledge what seemed obvious to her. "Your shooting is exceptional. Better than most of the operators here, if we're being honest. But here's what you're missing, Baker. When these men look at you, they're not seeing your range scores. They're seeing their sister, their daughter, someone they feel responsible for protecting." The hope evaporated, replaced by a familiar combination of anger and exhaustion. "With respect, Chief, I didn't join the military to be protected. I joined to serve. I know that. You know that. But changing how these men think, Getting them to see you as an operator instead of someone who needs protecting, that's going to take more than good range scores. It's going to take something that forces them to reconsider their assumptions. And what would that be? Honey asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Reynolds met her eyes with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. I don't know, Baker. But I'll tell you this, in 30 years, I've seen a lot of talented people get passed over for a lot of stupid reasons. Some of them figured out how to break through. Most of them didn't. The difference was usually some moment where they did something undeniable, something that made it impossible to ignore their capabilities. He stood, picking up his tray. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep being excellent. And maybe, eventually, your moment will come. As Reynolds walked away, Honey stared at her tablet, at the numbers that should have spoken for themselves but somehow remained silent. She thought about moments and opportunities, about the difference between waiting for recognition and creating circumstances where recognition became unavoidable, but she'd been waiting for 6 weeks. Maybe it was time to stop waiting that we've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. What Commander Hayes didn't know, what nobody at Coronado suspected, was that Honey Baker had been preparing for exactly this kind of dismissal since long before she'd arrived in California. Her grandfather, Callum, had been a competitive long-range shooter in Scotland, winning championships throughout the UK and Europe during the 1980s and 90s. He'd taught Honey to shoot when she was 12 years old, not as a hobby, but as a discipline that demanded absolute mastery of physics, psychology, and self-control. The rifle doesn't care how big you are, Callum used to tell her during their sessions in the Highlands. The wind doesn't care. The target doesn't care. The only thing that matters is whether you understand the variables and can execute under pressure. By 16, Honey was competing in junior championships, routinely defeating boys twice her size. By 18, she'd won the European Junior Long-Range Championship with a series of shots that had tournament officials checking for equipment violations. There weren't any. She was just that good. Her military service had built on that foundation. During her time with the British Armed Forces, she'd sought out every advanced training opportunity, every specialized course that might expand her capabilities. She'd completed the sniper instructor course at Brecon, the hostile environment training at a facility she couldn't name, and a NATO cross-training program in Norway that specialized in extreme cold weather operations. None of these credentials had been included in her transfer file to Coronado, not because she was hiding them, but because the evaluation system didn't have checkboxes for training completed through Allied military programs. Her official record showed the basics: marksmanship qualification, infantry training, standard tactical courses. It didn't show the hundreds of hours of specialized instruction that made her one of the most comprehensively trained shooters in any NATO military. Now, at Coronado, she'd been building on that preparation in ways nobody recognized. The topographical maps in her quarters weren't just academic exercises. She'd identified 12 locations within 50 kilometers of the base that offered challenging long-range shooting positions. During weekend leave periods, when most personnel relaxed or socialized, Honey would drive to these locations with her personal rifle and practice as she'd shoot from cliff sides where the wind patterns created unpredictable eddies and swirls. She'd shoot from valley positions where heat shimmer distorted her sight picture. She'd shoot at dawn and dusk when changing light conditions made range estimation difficult. She'd shoot after running uphill for 30 minutes, her heart rate elevated and her breathing labored, forcing herself to find calm in physiological chaos. Each session was carefully documented. Range, wind conditions, temperature, humidity, her own physical state, results. The data filled spreadsheets that tracked thousands of shots under hundreds of different conditions. She was building a personal database of performance variables, learning exactly how each factor affected her accuracy. She'd also been secretly accessing the base's ballistic computer during off hours, running simulations for scenarios far beyond standard qualification requirements, shooting from moving platforms, engaging moving targets at extended ranges, making calculations for extreme angles and atmospheric conditions. She'd memorized ballistic tables for 7 different ammunition types, could calculate bullet drop and wind drift in her head faster than most operators could with a calculator. Her barracks mates thought she was antisocial, spending so much time alone. Her supervisors thought she was overly serious, too focused on training for a support role. None of them understood that Honey wasn't training for the job they'd given her. She was training for the job she deserved, preparing herself for a moment of opportunity that she'd create if necessary. That moment was coming soon. She could feel it the way a sniper feels wind direction changes. And when it arrived, she'd be ready in ways nobody expected. What nobody at Coronado knew was that Honey Baker spent her nights doing what she'd always done, preparing for opportunities that didn't exist yet. While other personnel relaxed in their quarters or gathered at the base recreation center, Honey studied. Her small room had been transformed into a tactical research station, walls covered with topographical maps of the surrounding terrain, weather pattern charts, and ballistic tables she'd calculated by hand. Her laptop contained folders organized by scenario type: urban engagement, mountain warfare, desert operations, maritime interdiction that she'd downloaded every field report she could access through official channels. Analyzing successful sniper operations from the past 2 decades, she looked for patterns in the data, situational variables that separated successful shots from failed attempts. Wind speed, temperature gradients, altitude effects on bullet trajectory, the psychological factors that affected performance under stress. Every morning at 0430, before the base fully awakened, Honey ran. Not the standard 5-mile circuit that satisfied basic fitness requirements, but punishing hill sprints with a 60-pound pack, designed to simulate the physiological stress of combat operations. She'd learned to control her breathing, to keep her heart rate manageable even when her legs burned and her lungs screamed for more oxygen. After running, she practiced dry-fire drills in her quarters, assuming shooting positions, controlling her breathing, imagining wind conditions and target movement. She'd repeat the same sequence 50 times, then 50 more, building muscle memory so deep that her body would execute perfectly even when her conscious mind was overwhelmed by stress. The physical training was only part of her preparation. Honey had also been studying the operators themselves, learning their patterns and tendencies. She noticed that Patterson favored aggressive approaches, closing distance quickly rather than holding patient positions. Dutch preferred elevated positions with maximum visibility, sometimes sacrificing concealment for better sight lines. Turner, the veteran, showed old-school discipline, but his techniques reflected training from a different era. She didn't judge their methods as inferior, but she did recognize that different approaches existed, and that her smaller frame and different background had forced her to develop techniques these men had never needed to consider. Where they relied on physical presence and intimidation, she'd learned patience and precision. Where their size allowed them to muscle through challenging positions, she'd mastered efficient movement and weight distribution. These observations filled notebooks that nobody would ever read, tactical analyses that nobody had requested. But Honey had learned something important during her years in service. Opportunity favored the prepared, but only if you prepared for the right things. She also spent hours at the range during off-duty periods, working on scenarios that standard qualification drills never addressed. She practiced shooting from awkward positions, from prone positions on uneven surfaces, from sitting positions with artificial restrictions on her movement. She worked on rapid target transitions, on making accurate shots immediately after physical exertion, on maintaining focus through simulated distractions. The range master, a grizzled gunnery sergeant named Williams, sometimes watched these sessions with bemused curiosity. Once, he'd asked her why she bothered with such elaborate preparation when her assigned duties involved inventory management and logistics coordination. "Because I'm a soldier, Gunny," she'd replied simply. "Soldiers should be ready for whatever the mission requires." Williams had nodded slowly, his weathered face unreadable. "Fair enough, Baker. Just don't wear out my targets." What Honey didn't tell him was that she wasn't preparing for the missions they'd assign her. She was preparing for the mission she'd have to create for herself. The moment that Chief Reynolds had described, when she'd do something undeniable that made it impossible to ignore her capabilities. She didn't know when that moment would come, but when it did, she'd be ready. Part 4. Show the pattern of exclusion. 600 words. The pattern became impossible to ignore during the 8th week of Honey's assignment. Commander Briggs announced a special training evolution, a long-range interdiction exercise that would test the advanced marksmanship capabilities of Coronado's top-rated shooters. 20 operators would be selected based on recent qualification scores and performance evaluations. Honey's scores placed her third overall among all personnel who'd qualified in the past 60 days. When the selection list was posted, her name wasn't on it. Instead, she found herself assigned to the Safety Observer team, responsible for monitoring the exercise and ensuring range protocols were followed. She'd be watching through binoculars while others took shots she could make in her sleep. Baker got a minute. Lieutenant Commander Hayes appeared beside her as she stared at the posted list, his expression suggesting he knew exactly why she was standing there. "Yes, sir." Hayes gestured toward his office, and Honey followed, her jaw tight with suppressed frustration. Once inside, Hayes closed the door and settled behind his desk with a sigh that suggested this conversation exhausted him before it began. "I know what you're thinking," he started. "With respect, sir, I don't think you do." Hayes raised an eyebrow at her directness, but didn't reprimand her. "You're thinking that your scores earned you a spot in the exercise. You're thinking that you've been passed over again for reasons that have nothing to do with capability. Those aren't thoughts, sir. Those are facts. Here's another fact. Baker, this exercise involves 1,200-meter shots in variable wind conditions, followed by immediate movement to alternate positions while carrying full combat loads. The selected operators will be working in two-person teams, and if one member can't maintain the physical pace, both members fail. I can maintain the pace, sir. My fitness evaluations. Your fitness evaluations show that you meet standards," Hayes interrupted. "But meeting standards and matching the performance of operators who outweigh you by 80 pounds are different things. I'm not questioning your dedication or your shooting ability. I'm making tactical decisions about team composition." Honey felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So no matter how well I perform individually, I'll never be selected for team operations because other people assume I'll slow them down." Hayes's expression softened slightly. "I understand your frustration, but team leaders have to make decisions based on known variables. Until you've proven you can perform in field conditions with full combat loads over extended operations, that unknown variable makes you a risk that team leaders aren't willing to take. How can I prove I can perform in field conditions if I'm never selected for field operations?" The question came out sharper than Honey intended, but she was past caring about diplomatic phrasing. "That's the challenge," Hayes admitted, "and I don't have a good answer for you. What I can tell you is that throwing a tantrum about selection decisions isn't going to change minds. The operators who get selected for advanced programs are the ones who demonstrate not just technical skill, but also the judgment and temperament required for high-stress operations." The implication was clear. By objecting to her exclusion, Honey was demonstrating exactly the kind of emotional instability that justified excluding her. It was a perfectly circular logic that made advancement impossible. "Understood, sir," she said, her voice flat. "Good. Dismissed." Honey left Hayes's office feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. The message was unmistakable. Shut up. Accept your limitations, and maybe someday, if you're patient and compliant enough, someone might give you a chance. She had no intention of being patient or compliant, but she was learning that direct confrontation wouldn't work. If she was going to prove herself, it would have to be through actions that left no room for debate. The breaking point came during the 10th week, but it started building 3 days earlier during a routine qualification exercise. Honey had been assigned to assist with the long-range training session, which meant she was spotting for operators while they took turns engaging targets at 800 meters. It was degrading work, using her expertise to help others succeed while being denied the opportunity to shoot herself. But she performed the duties without complaint. Patterson was having trouble with the wind calls, consistently missing left because he was underestimating the crossbreeze. After his 4th consecutive miss, Honey quietly offered an observation. "The wind's gustier than the flags are showing. There's a terrain feature about 600 meters downrange that's creating an eddy effect. You might try compensating an additional 2 MOA right." Patterson stared at her for a moment, then turned to the range instructor, Warrant Officer Kent. "Is she serious right now?" Kent glanced at Honey with an expression that mixed amusement with condescension. "Baker, Patterson's been shooting long range for 8 years. I think he understands wind calls." "Of course, sir," Honey replied, stepping back. Patterson took his next shot, missed left again, and swore under his breath. For his sixth attempt, Honey noticed him make a subtle adjustment to his scope, adding roughly 2 minutes of angle to the right. The shot connected center mass. Patterson said nothing to acknowledge her earlier suggestion had been correct. Kent simply marked the successful shot and called the next operator to the line. Later that day, Honey overheard Patterson talking with Dutch near the armory. "That Baker chick tried to coach me on wind calls today. Can you believe that? Like I need shooting advice from someone whose biggest accomplishment is counting magazines." "She's got some skills," Dutch replied diplomatically. "Her range scores are solid." "Range scores under perfect conditions with unlimited time," Patterson scoffed. "That's like being good at arcade basketball and thinking you can play in the NBA. There's a reason women haven't succeeded in special operations roles. The physical demands are one thing, but the mental pressure of knowing you're the weak link, that your team is at risk because of your limitations, that breaks people." Dutch didn't respond, but he didn't disagree either. The silence was its own form of endorsement. The situation escalated 2 days later during a command briefing on training evolution results. Commander Briggs was reviewing performance data when he made a casual observation that landed like a grenade in Honey's lap. "I want to address something I've noticed over the past several weeks," Briggs said, his tone suggesting he was about to deliver unpleasant news. "We have personnel who seem more focused on activities outside their assigned duties than on excelling within their designated roles. This creates concerns about priorities and judgment." He didn't name Honey specifically, but every eye in the briefing room turned toward her. The message was unmistakable: her extra training, her constant presence at the range, her obvious desire to do more than her assigned logistics duties. All of it was being reframed as a problem rather than dedication. "Special operations requires personnel who understand their role within the team structure," Briggs continued. "Individual ambition is admirable, but not when it comes at the expense of unit cohesion and mission focus. I expect everyone here to concentrate on their assigned responsibilities and trust that advancement opportunities will come to those who earn them through proper channels." After the briefing, Chief Reynolds found Honey in the equipment bay, her hands shaking slightly as she inventoried ammunition crates. "Don't let it get to you," Reynolds said quietly. "They're treating my dedication as insubordination," Honey replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "How am I supposed to earn advancement through proper channels when the proper channels are designed to exclude me?" Reynolds had no answer, because they both knew she was right. Retry proceed with Part 7, 8, 9, and 10. Make sure that each part has 600 words only. Edit. Part 7. Present the crisis, 600 words. The emergency call came through at 1,342 hours on a Wednesday afternoon that had started unremarkably. Honey was conducting inventory in the armory when the base-wide alert system activated, followed immediately by Commander Briggs's voice over the PA system. "All available personnel report to the command center immediately. We have an active hostage situation." Honey dropped her clipboard and ran, arriving at the command center within 90 seconds. The room was already packed with operators, all eyes fixed on the main display screen showing aerial drone footage of a commercial building complex about 30 kilometers inland. Briggs stood at the front, his face grim as he briefed the assembled personnel. At 1,320 hours, 4 armed individuals took control of a corporate office building in Vista Ridge. Current intelligence indicates they're holding approximately 23 hostages on the 5th floor. Local law enforcement has established a perimeter, but the situation is escalating rapidly. The drone footage showed a modern glass and steel structure surrounded by police vehicles. Honey could see the tactical challenge immediately. The building's design featured floor-to-ceiling windows that provided excellent visibility for the hostage takers, while making conventional assault approaches extremely dangerous. FBI hostage rescue team is en route, but won't arrive for another 90 minutes, Briggs continued. Local SWAT is requesting our assistance. They need a precision shooter who can establish overwatch position and neutralize threats if hostages are in imminent danger. Turner spoke up from the front row. "What's the range from viable shooting positions?" "That's the problem," replied Briggs, pulling up a tactical map. "The building is positioned in a commercial district with limited elevation options. The nearest suitable position is the parking structure across the street, which puts the range at approximately 1,100 meters. Wind conditions are variable, gusting up to 15 knots from the southwest. A murmur went through the assembled operators. 1,100 meters was an extremely challenging shot under ideal conditions. With wind gusts and the pressure of hostages in immediate danger, it moved into the realm of shots that even elite snipers would hesitate to attempt. "Who's our best option?" someone called out. Briggs consulted his tablet. "Based on recent long-range qualifications, Turner and Patterson have the highest scores. But that exercise was at 800 meters in controlled conditions." Honey felt her heart rate accelerate. She'd made 1,100-meter shots dozens of times during her private training sessions. More importantly, she'd practiced specifically for this kind of scenario: variable wind, urban environment, time pressure, the psychological weight of knowing that missing meant innocent people died. She stepped forward before she could second-guess herself. "Sir, I can make that shot." The command center fell silent. Every head turned toward her, expressions ranging from surprise to disbelief to barely concealed irritation. "Baker," Briggs said slowly, his tone suggesting he thought she'd misunderstood something fundamental. "This isn't a qualification exercise. This is a real-world scenario with lives hanging in the balance." "I understand that, sir. I've trained extensively for long-range urban engagements. I can make the shot." Patterson let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. "Baker, no offense, but the longest documented shot you've made on this base is 800 meters under perfect conditions. You're talking about adding 300 meters, factoring wind gusts, shooting through an urban heat shimmer, and doing it all knowing that if you miss, people die." "I'm aware of the variables," Honey replied, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "And I'm telling you I can make the shot." Briggs exchanged glances with Hayes and Reynolds. The message passing between them was clear. This woman was delusional, mistaking confidence for capability, about to embarrass herself by overestimating her abilities in a crisis situation. "Turner, Patterson," Briggs said, making his decision. "You're up. Get your gear and move out. You've got 15 minutes. Honey stood frozen as the selected operators rushed to prepare. Once again, her capabilities were being dismissed. But this time, the cost wasn't just her career advancement. This time, people might die because the wrong shooters were being sent. Honey arrived at Vista Ridge 12 minutes after the official SEAL team, parking her vehicle 3 blocks from the primary perimeter. She could see Turner and Patterson being escorted toward the parking structure that had been designated as the primary sniper position. Local law enforcement had established a command post, coordinating with FBI negotiators who were trying to establish communication with the hostage-takers. She needed a different position, one that nobody else had considered. During the drive, she'd studied the satellite imagery on her phone, identifying an alternative location that offered a better angle and more stable wind conditions. A commercial building 2 blocks east had a rooftop access that would give her a clearer sight line to the 5th-floor windows where hostages were being held. Getting to that rooftop without authorization would require bypassing security and potentially breaking several laws. Honey no longer cared. She grabbed her rifle case and made her way through the chaos of emergency response vehicles, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where she was. The commercial building's security guard was distracted by the spectacle outside, watching through the lobby windows as the tactical situation unfolded. Honey slipped past him and took the emergency stairs to the roof, her gear bag slung over her shoulder, heart pounding but hands steady. The rooftop was perfect. She set up her position behind an HVAC unit that provided both cover and a stable shooting platform. Her rangefinder confirmed the distance, 1,087 meters to the target windows. Wind was gusting from the southwest at 12 to 15 knots, exactly as the briefing had indicated. Through her scope, she could see into the 5th-floor office space. Hostages huddled in one corner, their faces tight with fear. 4 armed individuals moved between them, agitated and aggressive. One of them kept pointing a weapon at hostages, clearly escalating toward violence. A Honey's radio crackled with command frequency chatter. She'd tuned to the tactical channel before leaving base, wanting to monitor the official operation. "Overwatch 1 in position," came Turner's voice. "Range confirmed at 1140 meters. Wind is problematic. Requesting authorization to move to alternate position." Negative, Overwatch 1, responded the FBI commander. That position provides the only viable sight line. You need to make it work. Honey smiled grimly. They were wrong. Her position offered a better angle, shorter range, and more predictable wind patterns. But nobody knew she was here. She began her calculations, the process so deeply ingrained it felt like breathing. Wind speed, wind direction, air temperature, humidity, altitude, barrel temperature, ammunition specifications. The variables lined up in her mind like a mathematical equation she'd solved 100 times before. Her training took over. Breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to nothing but the reticle, the target, and the space between them. This was what Callum had taught her in the Scottish Highlands. What years of preparation had built toward. The ability to find absolute calm in absolute chaos. Through her scope, she watched one of the hostage-takers raise his weapon toward a woman in a business suit. The woman's face was frozen in terror, knowing she had seconds to live. Overwatch 1. Turner's voice came through the radio, tight with stress. Wind is too variable. I can't guarantee the shot. You need to guarantee it, the FBI commander replied. We're running out of time. The hostage-taker's finger moved toward the trigger. Honey's crosshairs settled on his center mass, adjusted for wind, adjusted for distance, adjusted for the slight elevation difference. She exhaled slowly, finding the natural pause between heartbeats where the world goes still. Then she squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the rooftops. And 1,100 meters away, the hostage-taker dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. For a moment, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. The radio frequency exploded with confused chatter. Nobody had authorized a shot. Turner and Patterson hadn't fired. Yet one of the hostage-takers was down, dropped by a shot that had come from somewhere else entirely. Through her scope, Honey watched the remaining 3 hostage-takers react with panic and confusion. One of them moved toward the windows, trying to identify where the shot had come from. He was making himself a target, and he didn't even realize it. Second target presenting. Honey murmured to herself, tracking his movement. The man raised his rifle toward the hostages. Whether from rage or fear, she couldn't tell. It didn't matter. She had a clear shot. She adjusted for his new position, compensated for the wind gust she felt against her cheek, and fired again. The second hostage-taker fell before anyone on the tactical frequency had processed what was happening. Who is shooting? The FBI commander's voice demanded. Overwatch 1, confirm your status. Negative on the shot. Turner responded, his voice carrying equal parts confusion and awe. Someone else has engaged. And whoever it is, they're making impossible shots. The remaining 2 hostage-takers were now in full panic, abandoning any pretense of control. One of them grabbed a hostage as a human shield, dragging the terrified woman toward the window. Honey's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed. No shot. The angle was wrong, the risk too high. Overwatch 2 in position. Came a new voice over the radio. Patterson had reached his secondary location. I have eyes on remaining targets, but I don't have a clean shot. The hostage is too close. Honey watched through her scope as the hostage-taker repositioned, trying to keep the woman between himself and any potential shooters. But his grip was awkward, his positioning rushed and panicked. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, part of his upper body would be exposed as he moved toward the door. She waited, breathing steady, heart rate controlled, every variable calculated and accounted for. The moment came. The hostage-taker shifted position, and a 6-inch section of his shoulder and upper chest appeared in the gap between the hostage's body and the window frame. At 1,100 meters with gusting wind, it was a shot that maybe 5 snipers in the world would attempt. Honey was one of them. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. She watched the round travel through the air, watched it slip through the narrow gap, watched it connect exactly where she'd intended. The hostage-taker dropped, and the woman he'd been holding stumbled away, alive and unharmed. The tactical frequency fell silent for 3 full seconds. Then, confirmed kill on third target. Outstanding shot. Who the hell is shooting? The fourth and final hostage-taker had seen enough. He dropped his weapon and raised his hands in surrender as local SWAT teams stormed the building. Within 90 seconds, all hostages were secured and evacuated, alive and safe because someone had made 3 shots that conventional wisdom said were impossible. Honey carefully cleared her rifle, and began breaking down her position. Her hands shook slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off, but her mind was crystal clear. She'd done it. 3 shots, 3 targets, 1,100 meters, variable wind conditions. Lives on the line. 3 perfect shots. She'd documented everything. Her position, the wind readings, the exact calculations she'd used, the timestamps on each engagement. When they came for her, and they would come, she'd have proof of exactly what she'd accomplished. As she made her way back to the roof access, her radio crackled one final time. All units, be advised. Base Command is requesting immediate identification of the unauthorized shooter. Repeat, identify the shooter who engaged from secondary position. Honey smiled and keyed her radio for the first time. This is Specialist Honey Baker. I'm heading back to base to file my report. Tell Commander Briggs I'm ready to discuss my future with the unit. The inquiry took 3 days. During that time, Honey was confined to quarters while Naval Special Warfare Command reviewed her training logs, interviewed witnesses from the Vista Ridge incident, and consulted with FBI officials who'd been present during the operation. The media had picked up the story. Though Honey's identity remained officially classified, news outlets were calling her the Angel Sniper, breathlessly recounting how an unknown operator had made 3 impossible shots to save 23 hostages. Military analysts appeared on television to explain why the shots should have been impossible, which only made the accomplishment seem more impressive. On the morning of the 4th day, Honey was summoned back to the conference room. This time, the assembly was different. Briggs was there, along with Hayes and Reynolds. But they'd been joined by Captain Richardson from Naval Special Warfare Command and 2 senior officers whose insignia indicated they'd come from even higher up the chain of command. Specialist Baker, Richardson began, his tone formal but not hostile. We've completed our review of your actions at Vista Ridge and your unauthorized training activities. The situation is complex. Honey remained at attention, her face neutral despite the anxiety churning in her gut. Your actions violated multiple regulations and orders, Richardson continued. Under normal circumstances, this would result in court-martial and likely discharge. However, these are not normal circumstances. Your intervention directly saved 23 lives. The FBI has officially commended your actions. The Governor of California has requested to meet you personally. He paused, exchanging glances with the other senior officers. More significantly, your training logs demonstrate a level of dedication and capability that we failed to recognize. That failure is on us, not you. We created a system that evaluated you based on assumptions rather than evidence. And we very nearly allowed those assumptions to cost innocent lives. Honey felt something shift in her chest, though she kept her expression carefully controlled. Therefore, Richardson said, we're offering you 2 options. First, you can accept non-judicial punishment for your violations, remain in your current assignment, and we'll consider this matter closed. Or second, you can accept a transfer to Naval Special Warfare Group 2, where you'll undergo formal evaluation for our sniper program. If you pass, you'll become one of the first women to serve as an operational sniper with NSW. The room was silent. Honey's mind raced through the implications. The first option was safe, predictable, a slap on the wrist followed by return to the status quo. The second option was everything she'd been fighting for. But it came with the understanding that she'd be under intense scrutiny, that any failure would be magnified, that she'd have to prove herself again and again. I choose the second option. Sir, she said without hesitation. Richardson smiled slightly. I thought you might. Report to Building 227 at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your rifle and your training logs. Let's see if you can do officially what you've already proven you can do unofficially. 6 months later, Honey stood on a shooting range at Fort Bragg, instructing a class of advanced sniper candidates on wind calculation techniques for extreme range engagements. Her official designation was now Scout Sniper, and the patch on her shoulder carried weight that her logistics insignia never had. The students in her class included 3 male operators who'd initially questioned whether a woman could teach them anything about long-range shooting. Those questions had evaporated after she'd casually made a 1,200-meter shot in 20-knot crosswinds on the first day of class. The rifle doesn't care about your size, she told her students, echoing her grandfather's words from years ago. The wind doesn't care. The target doesn't care. The only thing that matters is whether you understand the variables and can execute under pressure. One of the students raised his hand. Is it true that you made 3 consecutive hits at Vista Ridge in under 90 seconds? Honey smiled. It's true. And before this course is over, you'll understand exactly how those shots were possible. Not because they were lucky, not because they were impossible, but because they were the result of preparation meeting opportunity. She looked out at the range, at the targets set at various distances, at the flags showing wind direction and speed. This was where she belonged. Not counting equipment in a supply depot, not watching others take shots she could make in her sleep, but here, teaching the next generation of snipers that excellence had nothing to do with size or gender and everything to do with dedication and skill. Later that afternoon, Honey received a message from Chief Reynolds. He'd retired from active duty but still followed her career with interest. His message was brief. Told you that your moment would come. Glad you were ready for it. Honey typed her response. I didn't wait for the moment, Chief. I created it. She hit send and returned to her students, to the range, to the work she'd been born to do. The world had finally caught up to what she'd always known. That the most dangerous person on any battlefield isn't always the biggest or the strongest. Sometimes, it's the one everyone underestimated. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.